I'm going to start. I think Mark wants to do a bit of a question and answer thing, but we could do that at the end. I mean, or whatever. I'm going to start off with another of my dub pieces.
Yo.
I was talking about the disaster that's happening, the evil fucking disaster that's happening currently in Ukraine. This one is the story of 40 years of complete disgusting betrayal and opportunism and imperialism in Afghanistan. As Afghan musicians are silenced and beaten, and women thronged into submission and veil, as gay men are tortured by gun-toting fascists, I'm taking you back to the old hippie trail. That was the Afghanistan of the 70s. Left-wing ideas were being spread fast by young, angry students and workers in cities, opposed in a countryside stuck in the past. The radical hippies of Europe came visiting, Marx, feminism and land rights in tow. And urban Afghanistan made revolution, but rural Afghanistan rose and said no. Young radical teachers went into the countryside, ordering mullahs to let the girls learn. They had their throats cut, acid thrown in their faces. Their comrades attacked elders' homes in return. The Civil War became increasingly brutal. The communists split, looked to Russia for aid. Brzezinski and Carter saw an opportunity. Funds were established and contacts were made. They financed the torture and murder of teachers, denial of learning and burning of schools. The thugs who one day were behind 9/11 were funded and trained as America's tools. Their aim was to force Soviet intervention, get Russia involved in its own Vietnam. The fact that these allies all hated the US was simply ignored in their cynical plan. Most Afghan communists welcomed the Russians, which cost them support in a brave sovereign nation, and our leaders called Islamist terrorists heroes, brave fighters opposing a red occupation. There followed 10 years of unspeakable stalemate, the US and Russia both sharing the blame. Then Gorbachev organised Soviet withdrawal, but warlords still fought till the Taliban came. The peace that they brought was the still of oblivion for women, for thinkers, for music, for life. Then came 9/11, a US invasion, a new occupier, the same brutal strife. The irony was that this time the Americans built schools for girls, didn't finance destruction. Life in the cities got better for many, with hope of renewal, rebirth, reconstruction. But the countryside remained a hive of reaction. The Taliban fled, but they quickly returned. Once more they spread hatred, disguised as religion. Once more schools were tortured, once more schools were burned. And now the Americans flee like the Russians, and Taliban thugs commit hideous crimes. I can't help but wonder just what would have happened if the Yanks hadn't financed them in former times. Imagine just how different different the world would be now if the teachers had won and the founders of Taliban and Al-Qaeda had been vanquished before they had even begun. Thank you. And something completely different now. This is bladder cancer dance sorts, a new genre that you won't have heard before. It's the disease's rhythm, coxswain. I'm gonna tell you the story. My big battle with the big C. I saw some blood when I had a pee, so I went to the doctor immediately. Doctor took one look at me, said into my bladder he needed to see, so I had to have a flexible cystoscopy. Hey, what's a flexible cystoscopy? Hey, the camera goes up your willy. Hey, not a lot of room there, dearie me. Hey, it's a little camera, don't worry. So I had my first flexible cystoscopy. It felt very sore and a bit tickly. What went up my willy? What I saw on the screen was really scary. What I saw on the screen was really scary. What I saw on the screen was really scary. There were tumours in my bladder, 1, 2, 3. So I had another flexible cystoscopy where laser went up my willy, helped them deal with the big C. Then I had another flexible cystoscopy to check they dealt with the big C. For 6 years then annually I had another flexible cystoscopy. I had some good news recently when the doctor said to me happily he's discharging me as cancer free, so no more flexible cystoscopy, which is a big relief to me, and I thank NHS massively for all the care they've given me. But when you've had a flexible cystoscopy for many, many years quite regularly, and you're 64 years old like me, you really have to watch it when you pee. Now most of the time I'm ATTILA MC. Hey, most of the time I'm ATTILA MC. But when I do this one, listen to me. Hey, when I do this one, listen to me. I'm tenor man, dribbling on the rhythm. Hey, tenor man, dribbling on the rhythm. My pants on yellow man, that wouldn't be forgiven. I'm tenor man, dribbling on the rhythm. Dribble, 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 dribble. Dribble, 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 dribble. The point of this rhyme is plain to see. If there's something wrong with your body, get it checked out immediately. Then you could end up just like me, living your life like you want it to be, shouting on the rhythm in poetry, and not on a stretcher in A&E, or even worse, in the mortuary. Now I'm so happy that I have life, and I'm so happy I love my wife, and her town that I love best is the one that I call breast, and her country best of all is the one I call Nepal. And so excuse me, yellow man, for your hit tune I've got a new plan. It's like zonga 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 zen. It's zumba 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 zen. Hey, zumba 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 zen. And now I think that's enough from me and my flexible cystoscopy. But if you're in the Duke of Welly and you never pee the same time as me, and mine seems to go on endlessly, remember this poem from ATTILA MC and join in with this chant with me. I'm tenor man, dribbling on the rhythm. Hey, tenor man, dribbling on the rhythm. My pants aren't yellow man, that wouldn't be forgiven. I'm tenor man, dribbling on the rhythm. Dribble, 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 dribble 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 on the rhythm. An exhortation to everybody to get yourself looked at if you think there's something wrong. Down there, especially if you're a bloke. Do it. Cheers.
Go!
Absolutely, it is absolutely fundamental. So, there is so much stuff that I've got to do. So many different poems from different eras of my time as Attila the Stockbroker. So I'm just going to select a couple more now.
Your Strummer.
I think, sorry?
The Strummer song.
So I'm going to do that. That's the song. I'm going to do that in a minute. I'm going to do this one now. This is a true story and a poem that I was always going to write at some point in my life. But I didn't, and then I finally did on the 50th anniversary of what I'm about to describe. And this is, it's the kind of thing that when it happens to you, when you're little, it just completely, totally sticks with you forever. And I'm incredibly fortunate and privileged to be able to convey how it felt and how it feels. This is called My 9th Birthday. I'm sure it won't surprise you to learn I was a proper little show-off. Too clever by half, said my Victorian grandmother who lived in the flat downstairs. You spoiling Muriel. Children should be seen and not heard. Be quiet, John. When you begin to pay a little, then you begin to say a little. There were plenty more such epithets. If I asked what was for tea, on the days that she was in charge of me, she'd always say, air pie and a walk round, or bread and pullet. And when she read about the latest exploits of the royal family, or anyone else remotely wealthy or privileged, in the pages of her beloved Daily Express, she'd often exclaim with heartfelt approval, it's not for the likes of us. When, years later, I read The Ragged Trouser Philanthropist by Robert Tressel and heard that particular servile catchphrase again, I felt retrospectively vindicated in my instinctive determination back then to do the exact opposite of nearly everything she told me. Despite my grandmother's best efforts, I was seen, heard, and then some, in school and out. Self-assured and confident, playing the violin and recorder, writing little poems and songs, and about to begin a massive project about the American Civil War based on the battle stories printed on the back of the unbelievably gory bubblegum picture cards we boys bought on our way to school. Cards with titles like Crushed by the Wheels, Wall of Corpses and Messenger of Death. If you're male and over 50, you may well remember. My form teacher like me let me help other kids in class. I had lots of friends, and if wannabe bullies hit me, I hit them back. Like I say, a proper little show-off. It was my 9th birthday. At Manor Hall Junior School, when it was your birthday, you couldn't wait till lunchtime, but you had to. Then you stood in front of everybody else in the canteen. A big, colourful plastic cake was brought out with proper candles on it. You blew out the candles. Everyone sang happy birthday, even the kids who thought you were a show-off wanker. The teachers made sure of that. And you got the chance to grab a handful of sweets from a big jar. As far as I can remember, I was the only one with a birthday that day, so I had everyone's undivided attention. I was really looking forward to it. But I never got to show off, and I didn't want to show off. My 9th birthday was different. It was October the 21st, 1966. Before we went to the canteen for lunch and my little birthday cameo, we were told that there was going to be a special assembly in the school hall. Everyone wondered what had happened. Even I realised they wouldn't have one just because it was my birthday. The headmaster, Mr. Young, came in looking very sad and told us that earlier that day, a huge mountain of coal waste had engulfed a junior school like ours in a Welsh mining village called Aberfan. And many children the same age as us had lost their lives. He asked us to pray for them. We all did. Some of us cried. They still sang happy birthday in the canteen a few minutes later, but it wasn't a happy birthday at all. I kept thinking about those children. After I got home and talked to my parents and had my birthday tea with my friends, I tried to write a poem for Aberfan, but I couldn't. The poem I wanted to write was far too big for a 9-year-old. We did a collection at school, the money was sent to the disaster fund, and then, as happens when you're a child with loving parents and a supportive school, other things quickly came along to take the sadness away. But on my birthday, for the next few years, I always thought about the children of Aberfan. Years later, I learned about the underground springs below colliery waste tip number 7 on the hill above the village, which caused the coal waste to turn to slurry and crash down on the school. Springs easily spotted on maps, which were never even consulted. I learned about the negligence of the authorities and the insensitivity of the press. Some things never change. I learned about the father who, as the inquest into his child's death declared the cause to be asphyxia and multiple injuries, shouted out, "No, sir, buried alive by the National Coal Board." I learned how a ruling was made. The parents had somehow to prove their children's deaths had caused them anguish before they could benefit from the disaster fund, and that some of the money from that fund was used to clear the other waste tips above Aberfan because the Coal Board refused to pay for it to be done. I learned about the long-term psychological effects of the disaster on the whole village. In short, I learned how the lives of working-class people, of working-class children, were held cheap, so cheap. But that was much later. Back then, I was a child, a proper little show-off who didn't want to show off on his 9th birthday, trying to write a poem for children like him, for the children of Aberfan. Thank you. That's dedicated to any of you here from mining communities, as is this one, which I wrote for the Orgreave Truth and Justice campaign after they asked me to compare the 40th anniversary commemoration of the Battle of Orgreave. And this is called Never Forget. I remember my stepfather moaning in the first strike in 1972. Miners holding the country to ransom. I was 14. I thought about you. He worked underground, often in danger. Hewed the coal we depended upon. He earned more dealing tax forms in Brighton. I knew then just whose side I was on. I remember Kent Pickett's at Shoreham when our port bosses shipped in scab coal. By the time they were back 12 years later, a new anger burned deep in my soul. You'd won once, but this time will be harder. For your foe was no bumbling Heath. It was Thatcher, revenge her agenda, a class warrior, armed to the teeth. You were miners on strike for your future, for your pits, your communities, ways. We were punks, poets, anarchists, lesbians, theatre groups, Rastafarians, gays. Different worlds in a rainbow alliance, fired up and determined to win. Thatcher lumped us all together, punk or miner, the enemy within. I remember those pictures from Orgreave, police faces contorted with hate. The communities brutalised, battered by the raw, naked power of the state. If it took guns and tanks to defeat you, should have used guns and tanks on you too. The veneer of democracy shadowed the hired thugs of the privileged few. Now the bankers control the economy, and the poor and the sick get the blame. And our once proud and strong labour movement is shackled and timid and tame. But this poet will always remember the brave men and women I met who will carry on fighting for justice and will never, no, never forget. Thank you. The next one is a request, and it is the song I wrote for Joe Strummer shortly after he died, and it's called Commandante Joe. And after this, there's a chap who wants to play a baran with me, who is welcome to come and join me on stage. So, by special request. Oh dear, that's Commandante Joe. Quite a lot of ways I grew up just like you, a bullshit kid who didn't think the way they taught him to. You kicked over the statues, the roots from Rebel Star, who knew that punk was more than just the sound of a guitar. And I'll always remember that night at the Rainbow when you wrote a soundtrack for my life, Commandante Joe. So many bands back then were like too many bands today. A bunch of blokes who made a noise with bugger all to say. The Clash were always out in front, you put the rest to shame. Your words were calls to action, your music was a flame. You were our commandante and you raised an inferno, and you wrote a soundtrack for my life, Commandante Joe. Reggae in the Palais, midnight till 6, rocking Reds in Rockwell Park, spent guns in Knightsbridge, up and down the West Way, in and out the lights, Clash City Rockers, know you're right. I guess in quite a lot of ways I grew up just like you, a bolshy kid who didn't think the way they taught him to. But you, I always knew the words of music held the key. As you did for so many, you showed the way to me. Although I never met you, I'm so sad to see you go, cause you wrote a soundtrack for my life, Commandante Joe. Although I never met you, I'm so sad to see you go, cause you wrote a soundtrack for my life, Commandante Joe.